What does SpaceX's first astronaut launch mean for the future of space exploration?
And what are humanity's plans for returning to the moon and reaching for Mars? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there, and welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the tech week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as always by Alex Kidman, a man who I briefly usurped this week to claim the title of Vertical Hold Donkey Kong champion. Sadly, mine was a short-lived victory after Alex smashed the 50,000 barrier to knock me back into second place. Alex, how does it feel to be back on top?
Look, I don't want to get too hyperbolic about this, but the 90 minutes where you had bested me were the worst 90 minutes in the history of creation. And thankfully, I'm now back in my proper place. But I've still obviously got your 1942 record to chase as well.
Yes, there's a lot of work to be done there. Speaking of having a rough week, there's a lot happening in the world at the moment. We've all been shocked and saddened by what we're seeing come out of America. But rather than plunge into the murky depths of social media and hate speech, instead we thought we'd look to the stars as America returns to human spaceflight with an historic SpaceX launch. To talk us through the latest from SpaceX and what it means for the future of space exploration, we're joined once again by Byteside editor Seamus Byrne. Seamus, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back. Nice to talk to you guys. It's really good.
How's your week been going? Anybody knock over your high scores?
No, look, I have to say, when you were talking through that, I was actually trying to think about, what I'd be trying to line up. Bank Panic is my all-time classic arcade machine. As my parents at one stage of life, we actually owned a little corner shop, and as every classic corner shop of the 1980s, we had an arcade machine out the front, and that was Bank Panic. And so I got really, really good at that game. And I still, every time I spot it, I love to play it.
That's living the dream. Living the dream.
Oh, it was. It really was.
So, like I said, we're talking space. We're talking big picture this week. SpaceX have put humans up into orbit. Why is this a big deal, Seamus?
I mean, I think the really kind of simple answer to that is almost that it's exciting and inspiring, right? Like that there is so much, when so many people kind of look back to, the Apollo missions, to the early eras of the space shuttle, that there were a whole generation of people who are inspired to kind of pursue careers, not just in space sciences, but in all sorts of sciences, because it was just kind of exciting, and it speaks to that really fundamental idea of trying to do stuff that is hard and that takes us into kind of unfound territory. And there's just all those kinds of exciting parts of it. But certainly in the American context, they haven't been flying themselves to space for a decade. And so it's a huge moment for them. And just, I guess, for commercial spaceflight as well, because this is the first time that we've had a commercial operation send a crew to the International Space Station.
So it's been, you mentioned that they haven't been up themselves for a decade, but obviously people have been going to and from the International Space Station. Those have been Russian flights, though. Is there anything technically different about this SpaceX flight compared to what the Russians are doing, or is it just American patriotism?
I mean, I think, look, there's no question that I think most experts say that the Russians have just been happily, just enjoying
Taking
the fact
the
they get to,
cash.
they get to overcharge the Americans because it's the only way. That classic thing of going, we have two seats available. These are the only two seats in existence. We'll take however much you're willing to spend on those seats. And it also meant that they have so much more of essentially control over the way in which the International Space Station has been operating in recent times. I mean, I think there's always been a truly international flavor to the crews on board. Lots of different sort of astronauts from different parts of the world, not just Americans and Russians. And so I think they've kind of respected that part of it. But definitely when it comes to making sure that they get more money than they put in, it's been a lot easier for them. And so it is about that idea of controlling your own destiny in space, and being able to kind of restore that has been really important.
But also, what's the backstory for SpaceX itself? I mean, this is one of Elon Musk's, we'll say, lesser crazy plans. Is he sitting there right now with a cigar saying, "I love it when a plan comes together"?
Look, I've seen him smoke cigars. I would believe that there's footage of him busting out the classic Hannibal 18 quote, just because he is a meme factory as well, right? So I'm sure Elon Musk has probably pulled that one at some point. But yeah, SpaceX, official full name, Space Exploration Technologies Corporation, I think it is. It was founded to just be a company that, it sits alongside all those Elon Musk, Mr. 21st century industrialist, electric cars, space missions, hyperloop railway systems, neural lace technologies to put our brain directly interfacing into computers. The guy just loves playing with all this stuff, and SpaceX has definitely been, alongside Tesla, probably the most commercially successful of these things. And I mean, commercially successful, of course, is its own careful statement at this point. He's spent
Mm.
a lot of money. They have spent, and they've raised billions of dollars to keep testing this technology, but they've definitely led the way. And so, when you think about what the technologies are involved, it's everything from the rocket engine that then sits inside the main rocket itself, that holds the payload to send up, that the Dragon capsule that sits on top of the rocket, like all of these different parts have been designed from scratch and are incredibly important to this sort of step by step process now, where SpaceX is kind of really, rapidly prototyping all these other ideas as well. So I'm sure we'll get into them, but where you've got things like, they've got their Starlink satellite system that's been launched. They've got, these missions, the idea that they're now making rockets that are self-landing rockets so that they save money by being able to reuse different parts. There's so many layers to what they've actually done with SpaceX, and it's all now becoming more and more visible through the success of this latest mission.
And when you say self-landing rockets, I'm not sure if that quite does justice to how cool this thing is. So for
Right.
people who are playing along at home who maybe haven't seen a video of this, what happens traditionally with a rocket is, and you would have seen this with the space shuttle, whatever, rocket goes up, has a big booster rockets on the side that gets it like the first stage, and then they fall off and fall to the bottom of the ocean and the rocket keeps going. What happens with is it the Falcon 9 rocket, I think it is the SpaceX rocket, those big booster rockets fall off the side, start up their own little rockets, fly back to the ground and basically land standing upright, like this mad sort of science fiction, in unison next to each other, and just land standing upright, ready to be used again. It's just mind blowing. It's the kind of thing that was, science fiction even 10 years ago.
So
Yeah.
Tesla auto drive, but explosive and working.
Yes.
Yeah. And look, we actually, we got up the other morning to watch it with the kids. They made it harder on us by, the failed launch on the Friday that then meant we had to get up on the Sunday an hour and a half earlier. But it actually, we didn't get the footage of the main rocket landing again, because it just glitched out on the drone ship that catches it.
Yeah.
That like fraction of a second where you just get to see that amazing kind of burst of flame as it just kind of suddenly goes from falling out of the sky to parking itself delicately on the ship.
So, Seamus, Elon Musk's actually been really notable with Tesla, that he's been quite willing to effectively sort of open source an awful lot of what he's doing with this. SpaceX is a commercial space exploration business. Has he given any indication that, reversible rocket designs might be something that you buy on wish.com in a few years?
It's a really good point, actually. I'm not 100% sure on how open source he's made any of the technology at this point, but I do know, he really does engage in that sort of idea that whether it is Jeff Bezos and his operations, whether it's Boeing's operations, that he really tries to sort of communicate with those companies in that collegiate way where they're all kind of nicely competing with each other, rather than the idea that that it's a cutthroat thing that only one of them can win. That that there is a real sort of clear sense at the moment that by by pushing each other to do their best and by sharing, at least kind of tips and knowledge and at the very least, well wishes, I think there's definitely that sense that multiple players all vying for for being the kind of people contracted to help NASA or whoever it might be, because I know that while we've had the SpaceX Dragon launch this week, I believe August is when the Boeing mission to the ISS is scheduled. I might be kind of slightly off on that, but that there is very soon another sort of NASA mission to the space station with the Boeing technology called the Starliner. So there's definitely a lot of these sorts of competitive things going on. And you're absolutely right. Like, I know that, Musk open sourced the battery technology because he just wanted to say we should be competing on other issues. And I think that's where I'm quite certain, as much as I'm not sort of specifically across those details, that I think things like, I think he'd happily sell a bunch of the actual kind of engines to other people if someone else went like, we want engines so we can start designing, other kinds of designs for the main rocket, because I think he'd happily sort of want to be competing on different parts of what he's doing.
So NASA's worked with contractors in the past, big companies like your Lockheeds and your Boeing. So that's not new, working in partnership with private enterprise. But the balance of that is shifting, isn't it? I mean, I think there's still a relationship between NASA and SpaceX in terms of funding, but this is really the emergence of a private company or private companies becoming key players rather than just partners in this.
Yeah, and I think it's partly, we need to think about the timelines involved, right? Because as much as Trump in recent years has made a lot of noise about wanting to kind of put America back in space and to sort of lead from the front and all those kinds of desires that he has flagged for the way he wants to see that run, and of course all the Space Force craziness. But on a 10-year timeline, it has been the focus on NASA having had budget cuts and having needed to partner up. And in a lot of ways, like, actually, one of the things I saw the other day, which I think, it's kind of that classic issue of commercial and government partnerships, is the idea that it's like, well, somehow the gains are privatized and the losses are incurred by the public. It's like for SpaceX, it's great to have a partnership with NASA where it's like, well, things go wrong, they got paid anyway. Whereas, if things go right, they get they get a lot of upside. Obviously, NASA
Yeah.
gets upside too, but that's where I think things like I think like the Orion and Artemis vehicles, I think they are actually still at least in part partnership, but I think there is a lot more work being done by like NASA JPL and things like that. Like, that's the Jet Propulsion Laboratory,
Yeah.
to sort of own a bit more of that next generation tech when they're thinking about going to Mars. And so in that sense, it becomes a little bit more competitive, but I'm sure there's still collaboration attached to those as well.
How dystopian does this all get? I mean, Space Force is very Star Trek, which seems utopian. But as soon as you get commercial entities involved, my head kind of shifts more towards Firefly and the idea of them taking the sky from me.
Yes. Um, Look, I am sure that things keep getting worse for a while. I mean, it's hard to think at the moment how things become lighter and fluffier. I do think I like Elon Musk has kind of become more and more of the crazy person in charge in recent times, rather than the sort of the nice person. But I at the same time I love his that real feeling of a rabid futurist who is also the kind of industrialist of the future, trying to sort of drive this stuff in a way that there were a bunch of those kinds of people in the early 20th century doing all these kind of big crazy things. But in that sense, I'm like, please talk a big game. It excites a lot of people, and if that's what helps to drive things, that's great. But definitely when it comes to things like landing on the moon, there's a lot of that sort of talk about, well, and then we'll do, when you kind of get this mixed discussion of militarization of space, because you have someone like Trump throwing around discussions like Space Force, that isn't just about, that's not a NASA thing, that's a military thing. And then you have the idea of, setting up a base on the moon. There are practical reasons for having a base on the moon, but most of the talk is more that rah, rah, rah. We need to dominate space in the same way that we dominate here on Earth. And you're like, oh, can we chill that part of it a little bit?
But that's what got them to where they were. Like, that's how they won the space race with the Russians, by taking that kind of attitude. Is that what it takes to get Americans across the line?
That it is a very good question, Adam. I hope that is not the only
Yeah.
reason that Americans think things are a good idea.
It strikes me that it's a difficult balancing act as well, because setting up a base on the moon, you're going to have to use some of the resources that are there, on an ongoing basis, plus, hydroponics and various other technologies. At the same time, they're starting to talk about mining the moon, which I think gets people a lot more nervous. And especially when you've got those commercial interests involved, quite how exploitative it potentially becomes. Not,
Yeah.
I suspect, that the moon really cares. It's a chunk of rock.
Yeah. And look, I love the biggest discussions like when it comes to mining in space are things like capturing asteroids on the basis that they are largely made up of of ice, and that it's actually about servicing the needs of a space industry. Because one of the really good reasons for having like a lunar base or having an orbital base of some kind where you can launch other long range spaceships from is that the hardest part is simply getting off the Earth and into space. And so these kinds of mining discussions, I think, are great, because it's that idea of saying the hardest part of like the cost per kilogram of getting water into space is like crazy. Like it's a huge amount of money just because of the weight. And escaping Earth's orbit with that weight. Whereas if someone starts, essentially capturing asteroids, bringing them into, a nice kind of industrial setup there somewhere between the moon and the Earth, then you're just kind of chipping off ice and converting it into water in a way that is actually far cheaper, because you're doing it up there in zero gravity instead of having to constantly, go in and out of Earth's gravity well. So there's all those kinds of things that I think are really exciting part of when the word mining gets thrown around. But when it is that idea of somehow thinking, well, we can kind of extract new resources off the moon instead of because we're running out of certain kinds of resources here on Earth or whatever it might be. It's kind of harder to think about, is there genuinely the same kind of value? Because again, when it comes to ferrying things backwards and forwards, then those costs are actually quite huge.
I can just imagine space cola being a thing as soon as Coke gets hold of some of that asteroid water.
It seems that, talking about going back to the moon, about once a decade, a US president comes out and says, we're going back to the moon. And then nothing kind of happens there. They are talking about it again. What's the latest plan, Shay, to put people back on the moon?
Yeah, so I think the new plan is known as the Artemis missions, which I think is a pretty cool name. She's the twin sister of Apollo. Get it? The Apollo missions.
Nice. I see what you did
Yeah.
there.
So it is, I think, quite a cool, it's quite a cool framework for what they're trying to do. But they basically are, the aim is by the middle of this decade to be on, feet, boots on the ground. Isn't that the good military way of talking about
Yes.
it? Having sort of a crew heading back to space. We will, I think, see the first launches of a mission essentially to go and do a lap of the moon like the old days. I mean, it's funny in that I think that's kind of one of those long-term aspects that everybody, we sort of look back and realize, well, they did all that stuff with the Apollo missions in the 60s and 70s and then sort of just went, well, we've run out of thoughts on what actually we were going to do once we got here. So like they made moon buggies and they played golf and they did weird little things for the cameras and not much else. And yet now, of course, we have to literally learn every one of those steps all over again with modern technology. So yeah, unmanned craft to do a lap of the moon. Then we will have sort of the first crewed orbits, and again orbits first, and then landing vehicles. So I think the map is like 2021, 2023, 2024, that sort of window of time. And it's always interesting, of course, because then that is just going and standing there again. Then the idea of how do people start to kind of think about creating lunar bases. I know, SpaceX is also talking about having, essentially orbital trips to the moon, perhaps as tourism in the next couple of years. And I think, and that's where they're also designing their kind of even kind of cooler, sexier, shiny, stainless steel looking spaceship. I think they're literally just calling it Starship. And please tell me they're going to play We Built
They have
This
to.
City. Like
They have to.
the first
Only when
time.
you're building the moon base.
You've got to pass legislation for that, I think.
Yeah.
Isn't Richard Branson, Virgin Galactic, aren't they also in the whole space tourism business?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting one because it is funny, isn't it, that that Branson, I guess, as a marketing guru, basically was all about the tourism aspect, and in that sense, it's like his side of things has fallen behind the others because he didn't have the idea of solving the practical problems of just being in space and using that idea that the practical steps of getting to space can also be paid for through industrial applications. And then you can, all those lessons can then lead you to being able to do highly successful, potential for highly successful tourism as well. So I think that's where SpaceX has definitely taken, the approach of having, tourism in the back of the mind, but the front of the mind is solving industrial problems first. And so, I think technically, it's been a long time since Branson was first promising to do, just those edge of orbit flight to kind of technically enter space and then come back down again. But that stuff even that has seemed like it's been a bigger problem than he had first hoped it would be.
It was interesting that I think last year NASA laid out the Artemis Accords, which was for international cooperation on moon trips. And that's a different approach to what we saw. The international cooperation for things like the Apollo missions was probably more around things like ground stations here and in Spain. But they're actually saying up front, we realize that either we can't do this alone or we don't want to do this alone. How open do you think they will be to playing nicely with each other, or does the European Space Agency and China think, screw you guys, we'll do it on our own? How do you think it'll play out?
I definitely I could see a relationship between ESA and NASA, definitely. It's hard with the tensions in the world right now to think of whether the benefits will outweigh that kind of very competitive situation that people find themselves in between China and the US. So that side of it gets trickier, and China's definitely sort of pushing harder to have more and more of its own space missions taking place. So I think that side of it is hard. Definitely, obviously everybody private is perfectly happy to say, hey, you pay us money and we'll help you build stuff. Sure. That's perfectly fine. I'm worried about how the Artemis Accords will influence all those people who have bought perfectly legitimate title deeds to slices of acreages on the moon. Because, what happens if they decide to build the base in your title deed area of the Sea of Tranquility, I ask you?
Yeah, well, dude, you're on my lawn.
But I think this also highlights, because there are a few other international treaties around, who owns the rights to the moon, who owns the right to space, and it's incredibly legally murky. And of course, it just hits that very, very obvious problem that if I'm if I'm an effective space cowboy, well, the police are several million miles away down on Earth.
Space Force will come and get you.
Enforcement of these treaties is going to be phenomenally difficult from the moment that anyone picks an advantage that they want to take.
Yeah, space marshals. We need space marshals.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm like, they're going to knock on the door of SpaceX in California, at the headquarters, and just going to say, "Excuse me, could you move? You just parked a spaceship on and started building a lunar base, and we American authorities aren't happy with that." And it's like, what right do you have to tell us where we can put something on the moon? Really, when all said and done.
So we crushed your Apollo lander. It had been there for years. You weren't doing anything with it. Vacant title.
Yeah. that'd be great actually if they put and then move it, out the front of their new lunar base.
Or for that matter, Lunar Theme Park to go all Futurama on it once the tourism takes off.
I have to
Well,
say, at this point, hang on, the coolest thing perhaps I've ever seen in my whole life was I went to Johnson Space Center a couple of years ago on the way home from a trip to Texas, and I was walking around looking at, they had the international space stuff from the Soyuz and the Apollo stuff, and there was a guy walking through there who looked a little bit like the comic book guy from The Simpsons, and he was humming a tune to himself, and it took me a second to pick it. He was humming Whalers on the Moon from that very early episode of Futurama. He's walking around Johnson Space Center humming Whalers on the Moon. And I'm like, oh my God, you're a prince among men. I fall at your feet. Sorry, please continue. I just had to share that because it's so cool.
Look, I mean, but I think this question of what happens with all of this stuff, both historically, commercially, socially, is an incredibly important one at both a technology level, the stuff we talk about week by week, but also a kind of a human society level. And this gets back, I guess, again to Elon Musk and his whole thing of where humanity goes in the future and this argument about whether or not we should go to Mars. Shay, are we going to get there?
Absolutely. Yeah, look, I absolutely see, Mars is in that, horizon over the next, the next 30 years? Like, no doubt, because we've got people like Elon Musk just kind of pushing and pushing that, that horizon for what we should be trying to do. I think that's completely true. I remember years back when Buzz Aldrin was actually out here in Australia he had some kind of Microsoft relationship at the time, and was doing a bit of a tour and talking to him about that. His big thing was always, we've become too shy of the idea. And this is, I think, one of those kind of NASA flaws from that kind of 80s and 90s era, was that idea that they didn't want to fail in public. And it was, he kind of really pushed that idea that, it would have been, it was the risk worth taking when they were pushing and pushing in the 60s. And, and some people do die along the way, but it's like, but every one of those people absolutely saw themselves as like a pioneer, as an explorer, that yes, they were willing to risk their life in the name of achieving these sorts of things. And his big thing was always that so many of those designs for how do we get to Mars was always designed with the idea that you have to come back. Those first people have to make the round trip as soon as they get there. And he's like, that is the most foolish way to try to plan it, because that's so hard, and it would be much better. And this is what kind of SpaceX's plan is that idea of you send those first craft, and those first craft then dismantle into a base. And then it's on like more the third or fourth trip that you then bring people back. But those first trips make so much more sense if it is about establishing something that can then become a base, and then you start worrying about, when people come home.
I would say this is where you definitely should look to the Chinese again, because if you look at the initial space race between the Americans and the Soviets, it was not just about technology. It was about proving dominance as I am the world superpower, so go suck it, you guys. And I think China would do absolutely anything to be able to be the ones in the history books that said, we beat the Americans in the space race and proved that we are the superpower of the 21st century by getting to Mars first. I think it'd be naive to think that someone in China's not thinking that right now. What do you think, Shay? Do you reckon they'll have a crack at it?
Oh, sorry, it was a very good statement. So I was letting you
like,
leave the gap there. I'm like, it's like, well played. I agree. I think they've definitely been doing more and more. And right, like, it's funny when we look at everything to do with manufacturing and high technology in the last 30 years, China has completely dominated the production process. Not necessarily design, that's certainly been that kind of, Apple has probably been the design leader, but every other aspect outside of Apple has pretty much been, Korea and China leading the way with the wider world of, designing products, manufacturing products, all based on really high tech. Even chipsets, TSMC and people like that out of Taiwan have been kind of handing it to Intel in recent years. So there's been kind of so much of that drive out of China that it would make so much sense that they would want to show that they're not just there to make stuff for other people, but that they can be those kinds of leaders and explorers for this new century.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Seamus for making time for the show this week.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure you being here. Now, if people want to find your writing online, where do they do that?
More and more, I'm kind of doing my own stuff at Byteside. So that's at byteside.com. Or in fact, in this very same app, you're listening to this right now. You could probably search Byteside, Byteside, and find another show. And what's the old saying? If you like this, maybe you might slightly like my show too.
You absolutely should. And if people want to find you on social media,
at Seamus on Twitter is the easiest place to do it.
And if you want to catch up with us, you can do that on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for listening. Remember, try to stay home, try to stay safe, and keep watching the skies. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Trying to build some scalable architecture for the audio systems.